Hello, everybody. Good, still morning, I guess. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Christian, for that warm introduction. I've been coming to IAC many years, but this is my first GLEX, and I congratulate the local organizers as well, of course, the IAF for what they've put together so far. So let me get started. I am going to talk about private astronaut missions, but I want to begin talking about a couple of other things that Axiom Space is doing. Really, we have three main areas of focus. The first is our commercial space station. And what you see here is the launch sequence of our 5 modules. Now, we've changed this recently. Originally, we were going to launch 4 of those modules to dock to the ISS. So we have an agreement with NASA that allows us to actually attach a module there, which is quite advantageous because instead of having to put everything in the first module, we can sort of take some, I'll call them utilities from the ISS, namely power, electrical power, and thermal rejection, so cooling. So the idea was we were going to launch what you see here is HAB-1, followed by HAB-2, followed by the research and manufacturing facility, which was the last one. And then the fourth one was going to be the PTM. Now you see here it says PPTM, and I'll explain that change. PTM was power and thermal module. So as I mentioned, we would be taking some resources from the ISS originally with those other 3 modules, and then when the power and thermal module came, it would provide its own organic, and then we would separate and become a fully functional, independent, free-floating private space station. Because of the sort of accelerated timeline to get the ISS to be able to prepare it to deorbit, we've changed that in conjunction with NASA, and we are now launching the first module called the PPTM. The P stands for Payloads Power Thermal Module, and it's going to be berthed to the ISS, and the advantage that that provides is the berthing port is a little bit larger than the docking port. It will allow us to transfer some payload racks and things like that into the payload thermal module. At the same time, we will send the HAB module into an orbit independently and then attach the PPTM, and it will attach to the HAB module, and then at that point, we'll have a fully functioning, free-floating private space station. So we're going to achieve that capability a bit earlier. The second thing we're doing is developing the next generation spacesuit. So you have a contract with NASA to build this spacesuit, which will be worn by astronauts when they step on the moon in the Artemis program. This is a contract that we won in competition with another company. That company won the contract to build an orbital spacesuit, so basically one that would replace the extravehicular mobility unit, the spacesuit, that's being used today on the space shuttle, on the space station. I said space shuttle because it was designed and built to be used on the space shuttle, which made certain things part of its normal routine, which are not true today. So back in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, the space shuttle would go to orbit, it would stay up there for 10 days, let's say, come back, and that allowed the suit to be refurbished on land by expert technicians. Well, that stopped when the shuttle went away, so the suits are now staying on the space station for months, if not years at a time, and that maintenance has to be done by the crews, and it wasn't designed for that. So our suit and both of the lunar, I mentioned that Collins won the orbital suit replacement. They since decided to withdraw, so now we're doing both suits. It's really the same suit, has different shoes. One you walk on the moon, the other one you float in space, but primarily it's the same. And some of the things that are really different about it are, again, this ability to do maintenance on orbit with evolvable, what we call ORUs, orbital replacement units. So basically you can take a part out, put a place in, put one back in its place, and it's much simpler design. It has some other capabilities that are quite unique. It has variable pressure, so all the suits so far have been a single operating pressure, generally about 1/3 of an atmosphere. The reason you like the idea of having a higher pressure available to you is the higher the pressure, the less time the astronaut has to spend preparing to go outside, meaning that we have to rid our bodies of nitrogen to avoid decompression sickness. But the higher the pressure, the less that requirement becomes. So you can imagine where you would go, start the spacewalk at a fairly high pressure, And then since you're breathing 100% oxygen in this pressurized environment, you could slowly reduce the pressure. The advantage of a lower pressure is the suit is more mobile. So those are the two other main activities, but the third one, and the one I want to focus on, is private astronaut missions. So here you see the four missions that we've flown so far. The idea of a private astronaut mission was initiated by NASA in 2019, and we are an American company, so NASA is our gateway, if you will, to the ISS. They announced this initiative in 2019. They said at the time they were considering up to 2 missions per year. Turns out it's really more like 1, and all of our access to the ISS is sort of regulated, if you will, by NASA. We won the right to do these missions via a competitive process, and as you can see, we won the first 4 of those competitions. There are 2 more missions being competed literally as we speak, and we hope to win the same as well. So let me go in some detail about some of these missions. The first thing I'd like to say, as you can see, there are 12 people that have flown or will have flown. The first mission occurred in 2022, the second 2023, the third in 2024, and the fourth is going to happen within the next month or so, currently scheduled for May 29th. Of those 12 people that flown, 2 of them are repeat flyers. I was the commander on AX-1 and AX-3, and then Peggy Whitson on AX-2 and will be the commander on AX-4. But other than that, we represent 11 different nationalities, and the idea here is that we're expanding access to a lot of entities, nations, individuals, researchers that would not normally have access to the ISS. So that is one reason that we do these private astronaut missions. The second one, as a company, we want to be able to exercise procedures, communications, the types of things that you need to be able to run a space mission. So this is all with an eye toward the space station that we plan to launch, as I mentioned, in the next few years. So this coordination, basically we want to build a team, the organization, and the procedures that we would use in order to do a space mission in the future Axiom Space Station, but we're doing it now on the ISS. So AX-4, which is what I want to highlight a little bit, is the first time that these 3 countries, which are India, Poland, and Hungary, will fly an astronaut in over 40 years. It will be the second flight for each of those countries, and obviously the first to the International Space Station. So the crew, I'd like to point out, I mentioned Peggy Whitson. She's a very decorated astronaut, has spent more time in space than any American so far. She commanded AX-2 and previously served on 3 different expeditions on the ISS, 2 of them as commander. The pilot is Shubhanshu Shukla from India, group captain. We call him Shuks, that's his call sign. Aviators and astronauts have nicknames. His is Shuks. From Poland, we have Slavoj Wisniewski. Sorry, I have to cheat here. Wisniewski. He just got married and hyphenated his name, so as if it weren't complicated enough. His call sign is Suav. And then from Hungary, Tibor Kapu. We call him Tibor. He doesn't have a nickname. Anyway, why is it interesting for countries to fly in space? A couple of things are true for any country. It obviously brings a lot of prestige. It's a great source of inspiration to the youth in that country. It is a chance for that country to perform its own organic science investigations on the orbital laboratory. And then for India in particular, it serves a couple of other purposes. Shuks and I and many other astronauts are test pilots, and in test pilot world, we have what we call the build-up approach. So you don't go get the most dangerous test point in a flight on the first time you fly the airplane. You go gradually, step by step. And this is a very fortuitous and profitable learning point for India as it gets ready for Gaganyaan. Similarly, for its researchers to be able to practice the ways that they will interact with the crew on orbit and with the mission control team, that they can get ready for Gaganyaan and, of course, the follow-on space station. So the AX4 is going to do 60 science activities, which is by far a record, representing 31 countries. So obviously India, Hungary, and Poland are among those, but also the UAE, Brazil, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and countries all across Europe will be represented. It'll also be the second human spaceflight mission, human spaceflight commercial mission for ESA. The first was Marcus Wandt, a Swede who flew on AX3 with me. And thanks to this change in the Indian space policy in 2023, it has allowed ISRO to collaborate with commercial companies to further their objectives. And as I said, it serves as a big point to help them prepare in some ways for Gaganyaan. These missions all have a similar profile. We launch on a Crew Dragon. It depends on the phasing to get to the ISS. Then we spend 10 days, or in these last two missions, 14 days aboard, and then we come home. So now I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the two missions that I have experienced with AX1 and AX2 and sort of talk you through some of the training that we went through to get there. So I would say the training in general consists of three different kinds. There's about 40% is training at NASA, how to live and work on the International Space Station, about 40% training at SpaceX, how to live and work on the Crew Dragon to get to the ISS and back. And then 20% I'm going to call miscellaneous. And this is miscellaneous training. This is one of the very first things that we like to do as crews, because we don't know each other. Unlike a NASA mission where we've been in the astronaut office for years at a time before we get assigned to a mission, we were complete strangers. In fact, this is the AX1 crew: Larry Connor, American; Mark Pathy, a Canadian; and Eitan Shtibe, an Israeli. And the first time we met, almost literally, was the mountains of Alaska in the Talkeetna Range. Now, this is through an organization called the National Outdoor Leadership School. And we spent about a week in the field. You can see we have pretty big packs, and that means that we're not on survival. In other words, we don't have to find our food or eat plants or kill animals. We bring all our food with us, but it's pretty miserable. And the concept here is bonding through suffering. And I can tell you that on this particular mission, we suffered. It was in June, but it seemed like winter. It rained, it snowed, it sleeted, it hailed. It had every kind of precipitation you could possibly imagine. For AX3, on the other hand, we had a different experience. We went kayaking in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and usually the weather up there is pretty miserable, rainy and wet. We had a week of glorious sunshine. So even though it was not quite as miserable, it also served the purpose of bonding. The next thing we did is we do some parabolic flight. So a flight where the aircraft does parabolas. The airplane goes nose down, then pulls up to about 45 degrees nose up or so, and then pushes over the top. And as a result, you get about 20 to 25 seconds of microgravity. It's a lot of fun until you come back down from that, and then you feel about 2 Gs at the bottom, and then you repeat that over and over. And it's not really a test or anything, it's just an exposure to what it's like to feel weightless. Then we go from microgravity to macrogravity. So this is a centrifuge, a commercial centrifuge operator in Philadelphia, and the sort of squarish looking silver box at the end of that arm is a cab that feels like a cockpit of an airplane, or in our case, a spacecraft. And the centrifuge is meant to expose us to the G-forces that we would feel during the launch, during the entry. And here I have overlaid the G-profile of the Falcon 9 with a Dragon capsule on top. May be difficult to read the units, but on the left, those are meters per second squared. Basically, divide by 10, and that's the number of Gs. So you can see the first stage goes up to about 3 Gs, and then you can see some sawtooth there. That is the engines throttling back so as not to exceed the maximum Gs. Then the first stage engines stop, they separate, and then you see the second stage lights, actually less than 1 G at the very beginning, and you see how it creeps up to a little bit over almost 5 Gs until second stage engine cutoff. Okay, and then we spend a bunch of time at NASA, and we do most of this work inside the Space Vehicle Mock-up facility. So it's a full-size mock-up of all of the modules of the ISS. They're not laid out exactly the same because we can't have modules going up and down, but they're all laid out in a horizontal plane. And again, our objective here is to learn how to live and work in space. So living, certainly how you sleep, how you eat, how you use the toilet, obviously very important. But more importantly, what to do in case of an emergency. Emergencies in spacecraft generally fall into two categories: depressurization, i.e. a leak, or a fire. Both are pretty bad. We spend a lot of time practicing the procedures and what to do. As you can see here, we also get some photography training and some medical training in case one of us has a medical problem. The rest of the crew has to learn how to take care of them. Now we go to SpaceX. SpaceX training is similar, how to live and work. There's a little bit less room to move around, so the eating and the sleeping arrangements are a little more primitive. But by and large, it's how we interface with the vehicle, both in routine operations, as in liftoff, ascent, and return, rendezvous and docking, and undocking, etc. Spacecraft is incredibly beautiful inside. It's very clean. I've had the privilege of flying on really 4 different spacecraft, and the first one was a Soyuz, and the last one was a Dragon, and it's a bit like the difference between a Lada and a Tesla, if you know what a Lada looks like. Pretty nice on the inside. The crew also spend a lot of time focused on fire and depress as those kinds of emergencies. Most of the operations of the Dragon, certainly during ascent and reentry, are just the 2 center people, the pilot and the commander. But the rest of the crew obviously has to be trained on what to do in case of a problem. So this training takes about 10 months to get from the time we start, that picture in the National Outdoor Leadership School, until we're ready to fly. And about 2 weeks before liftoff, we all go to see our very Dragon capsule. Obviously, the other work that we have done with SpaceX has been in a simulator. But this is difficult to see, but in the background underneath the blue scaffolding and some plastic wrap is our capsule, and we got in our flight suits and got in our capsule and went sort of through how the vehicle sounds, some of the peculiarities, smell the new car smell, that kind of thing. And then we go into quarantine, 2-week period of quarantine. NASA has what they call health stabilization program. Obviously, the idea is we don't want any germs, any unwanted crew members to go to the ISS with us. So we're in isolation. We have our food prepared by people who are living in the quarantine facility with us. In the meantime, the vehicle is being assembled. So the capsule is attached to the rocket in a facility that's nearby. This is all done horizontally. It goes out on sort of a rail car, and it gets erected into the vertical position. And on L-2, 2 days prior to launch, the crew goes through the routine they will go through on launch day. So we wake up at the same time, we have breakfast, we go to the suit-up room, we get suited up, we walk out the door at a specific time, we get in the cars, the Teslas that take us to the launch pad, we get strapped in, we go through the whole countdown procedure as if it were launch day, but when we get to T-minus 0 seconds, nothing happens. It's a little bit more serious on launch day, same kind of routine, but a very different outcome. Ascent in the Falcon 9, Crew Dragon with a Falcon 9 booster is quite exciting. It's very smooth, unlike the shuttle, which is very sudden, the liftoff, and a lot of vibration, a lot of noise. This is very gradual, but the acceleration, as you saw from that previous chart, is pretty dynamic. It all feels like pure unidirectional, like you're on a chair on a train track, and there's something pushing you faster and faster and faster, and you just can't believe how fast you're going. How fast are we going? 28,000 kilometers per hour is what we get to in about 9 minutes. And we're inserted at an orbital altitude of 200 kilometers. The space station is at about 400 kilometers. And then we spend a certain amount of time, and it depends on a lot of factors. Let me just say that the orbit of the space station is basically a plane that goes through the center of the Earth, but the Earth is rotating underneath it. So we have to launch at the exact second that plane crosses through the launch site, in our case, Cape Canaveral in Florida. And at that point, the space station could be directly overhead or it could be on the other side of the orbit. And that distance makes up what we call the phasing time that takes us to get from liftoff to docking. Eventually, we get within visual sight of the ISS. Obviously, this is us taken from the ISS looking back down. And we make our way to the docking port. Now, docking port, there are two of them. One is on top of the space station, as is this picture, and the other one is on what I would call the front of the space station. In either case, we come up from behind, we go in front, always looking at the space station, and then either continue on the docking axis or continue around to zenith and come down on the docking axis. There's obviously a vestibule between our hatch and the ISS hatch. We fill that with air. We wait a while. We make sure that it's not leaking. Then we open up both hatches and come aboard the ISS. So this is AX-1 crew visiting Expedition 67, which was on board at the time. And this is the AX-3 crew, just a little over a year ago, visiting the Expedition 71 crew. And then we get a lot of briefings about what to do in case of emergency. Here's where the fire extinguisher is. Here's your muster point when it's over. And then we get to work doing science. So as I said, these look a lot like a NASA or ESA mission. We're doing mostly science experiments, quite a bit of outreach actually, reaching out to school children on the ground, dignitaries, news programs, whatever the country customer wants. And then we do, and the rest of it is just living and working on the ISS. So here's some imagery of some of the things. You see Larry Connor, the first on AX-1 in the upper left-hand corner with his hands in what's called the glove box. The same, those are the hands of somebody else on the upper right. We did the first 3D hologram from space on the lower right, and then the lower left is a technology experiment to put these magnetic floating disks that sort of self-assembled. And just a few more images from AX-3. So as I said, somewhere between 10 days to 14 days on the ISS. In the case of AX-1, we were extended for 5 days, I want to say, due to weather. And for AX-3, we were extended 3 days. So we got a few extra days in space, which is never a bad thing. But at some point, it's time to come home. So the pilot and the commander usually put their spacesuits on in the ISS, while, as you see, the two mission specialists here are ready. They have their undergarments on, but they're going to do their donning of the spacesuit inside the spacecraft. And then again, the phasing is very similar from the time we undock to the splashdown. Can be anywhere from a matter of 4 hours or so to up to, in our case, 48 hours on the last mission, which is a long time to spend in Dragon. But re-entry, once you fire the engines, it all happens pretty fast. You go from 28,000 kilometers an hour to 27,900 or something. It's a very small delta V that it takes. But what that does is that the low point of your orbit, the perigee, is now in the Earth's atmosphere. And as soon as it's in the atmosphere, obviously the drag forces start to decelerate you faster and faster. Obviously, all that speed turns into heat, so the bottom of the capsule is red hot. We can see plasma floating up through the couple of windows, which is pretty exciting. It's fairly smooth, a little bit of vibration. G-forces, again, we've experienced them in centrifuge, so that feels pretty comfortable. And then you're back to basically zero G as you're free falling until the parachutes open. Parachute opening sequence is quite dynamic. First some drogue chutes, then some main chutes, which each of them have stages of opening because you don't want to shock the G, increase the G very suddenly. And then it's a pretty, I got ahead of myself. This is the undocking, and here is the splashdown. In both cases on my flights, we landed in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida. Before you know it, the rescue forces Is it dark for you as well? There we go. The rescue forces are coming with the apparatus to take the capsule. And basically the way it works is there's a recovery ship that's operated by SpaceX, and it is obviously in the area. The landing is quite precise, so they know pretty close to where we're going to be. And it backs up to the capsule. It has a sort of a crane that reaches over and lifts the capsule out of the water and puts it on the deck of the ship. And then they make sure that it's safe, meaning that there's no hypergolic fumes. Hypergols are used for the reaction control system, which is how we control the attitude during spaceflight and also in the first part of reentry. So there you see the ship backing up to the capsule, which is there on the upper right, and then on the deck, you can see the hatch. It looks a little bit different than it did on Ascent because of the extreme heat of reentry. From the time we touch down in the water to the time the hatch opens is somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes. So it's actually quite brisk. The crew usually are pretty good spirits. You know, after only 2 weeks in space, people are generally feeling pretty good. They can walk, maybe a little bit wobbly. We get out of the capsule into a medical facility to be checked out, and then walk onto a helicopter and lift it off to the nearest airport to continue our journey home in that case. Here's a quick teaser about AX4. Thank you. So we have a few minutes for some questions which have been coming in via the Slido app. One anonymous, showing a lot of activity done on the team. Is team building and creating a link inside the crew vital? Absolutely. I will tell you that there are a lot of attributes that we look in astronauts. Now I'm talking about government astronauts for a second. They have to be pretty proficient in ability to learn systems and execute procedures. Usually they have some kind of operational experience. Maybe they're a pilot or they're a diver. Sometimes they do that as a hobby. All that is very important, but many, many people have those qualifications. Somehow we reduce that number to maybe 100 or so that actually are interviewed by the agency, and I'm speaking about NASA, but I know ESA is pretty similar, and I assume the other agencies do a similar process. And those 100 people are interviewed by a board that consists mostly of astronauts and some managers. And when the interviewee leaves the room, the question everybody asks is, do I want to fly in space with that person? So teamwork is very important. I will say that of the various crew members that I've flown with from my first mission in 1995 until one last year, I would say that is the most important attribute that somebody can have, how they work together as a team, how they can bond with each other, how they can discover each other's strengths and weaknesses. That is what really makes a good crew. Another question, how are the standards different from government missions? So because we're going to the International Space Station, they are not different. The medical standards are exactly the same, the psychological standards are exactly the same, the training standards are the same. Now, when we start flying as an independent space station, we would like to relax at least the medical standards. And the reason is medical standards at NASA and the other agencies are very tough, and they're that way because there's a large investment that the agency puts into the candidates. They want them to serve a long career, flying multiple flights over many years, maybe even decades. For a private astronaut mission, that's not the case. They may just have either a brilliant researcher that wants to continue their one experiment in space, or somebody that is going there because their country has nominated them. So gradually we would like to open up the aperture of people from a health standpoint that can be admitted into space. We're thinking about, in fact, on AX4, we're flying an experiment that will start to open the door to potentially have type 2 diabetics be able to fly, first by measuring how well we can monitor blood sugar in microgravity. Is there a difference? Probably not, but we don't know for sure. So again, using this build-up approach, we're going to do step by step, because ultimately we would like to fly a broader range of people than are able to fly today. The status of plans for AX5 and onward. So as I mentioned, these missions for our company anyway are controlled by NASA. They put out what they call a request for proposals about a month and a half ago. The proposals are due at the end of this month, May, and we expect to hear sometime this summer which company will be selected to do the next 2 private astronaut missions. We have customers for AX5 that are ready to go. And we're expecting that that time frame would be probably Q3, Q4 2026, which would mean we would start training toward the end of this year. What will be the role and responsibilities of Shooks in AX4, and how will it help us? Well, as I mentioned, he's sort of a flag bearer for the Gaganyaan program. Obviously, it's a different capsule and that sort of thing, but his participation in the mission will be very important from the standpoint of how the team at ISRO and the researchers coordinate with him. I can tell you that for ascent for entry, as the pilot, he will have a large role in assuring the safety of the vehicle. He basically acts as a 2-person cockpit with the commander in sort of a challenge and response, a little bit like a commercial airliner. So nobody is making unilateral decisions. They make sure that they do so as a team. So he'll have a very important role during those phases of flight all the way through docking, and then again starting from undocking to splashdown. But during the mission itself on the ISS, he will be principally interfacing indirectly through teams back in India to help him do the experiments that have been proposed by the researchers here. I'm a little bit over, but I've been told I have a few more minutes, so let me keep going here. What is the role of a commander on board? So first of all, before I get to on board, in the training part of it, we are really there to help gel the team and help build confidence with people's abilities. I would say that training is actually a pretty enjoyable time. There's a lot to learn for sure, but you're doing it as a group. Nobody is holding your feet to the fire. It's kind of a congenial environment, and it's the commander who sort of sets that tone about having confidence, about being able to get through the training and ultimately through the mission. On board, we've evolved the role a little bit. On AX1, I had a suite of experiments that I was performing for Axiom, but that meant that the other astronauts had to rely more on the ISS crew, the resident crew, in that case, Expedition 67, whenever they had questions or problems with their experiments. And now that was a bit of a burden on NASA and the other agencies, and so we decided that the Axiom commander should be more of an advisor at large. I mean, obviously, we still have some dedicated activities, but for the most part, we are available to help set up, tear down, answer questions, and work with the various crew members to get through their science program. Let's see, let me take one more. Contingency plans for launch and reentry. So that's a very good question. When NASA flies a mission, and by the way, the SpaceX is a contractor to us just like they're a contractor to NASA. So they treat us as a company just like they treat NASA missions, with one exception, and that is that NASA missions have the support of the Department of Defense to follow them in their ascent corridor. So as the rocket leaves the launch pad, at any point there is possibility of what they call an escape. So there's a malfunction in the propulsion system, let's say. The capsule will separate from the rocket, and then depending on where they are in that ascent corridor, it will land in the water somewhere between just off the coast of Florida to somewhere near Ireland. And so the Department of Defense deploys a team to be ready to exact a rescue in that case. Obviously, they're not going to bring that boat all the way to wherever it is. So it involves having rescue jumpers come into the water with a lifeboat. Basically, they will use a jet ski to pull the capsule in an orientation to stabilize it, and at that point they'll attach the life raft, open the hatch, the crew members get out, and then they'll be extracted generally by helicopter. So since the Department of Defense can't really do that for a private company, we have really helped stand up a separate organization called Operator Solutions that does exactly that thing. And with the same, they lease the equipment or they lease the air services. We bought the equipment, so the jet ski, the life raft, all that stuff. And we've done an extraction exercise before AX1 where we were in a capsule mock-up off the coast of Florida. They flew overhead with an airplane, dropped the packages out with the rescue package plus 6 different rescue swimmers, and it was a big success. So obviously, safety and all of this is paramount, and we try to leave no stone unturned when we embark on these missions. For entry, it's a bit different. It's the cases of entry where you have to come back in a hurry are a little bit less, well, they're fairly predictable. So unless something goes really wrong, we will land somewhere near the coast, and we will know that within enough time to make sure that there's somebody there to get us out of the spacecraft. Pretty unusual if we were to do an unprepared landing to an unprepared place, but there is that possibility. So let me close by saying thank you for your attention. I am very excited about this place that we find ourselves. I don't know if you attended the previous session, but Clay said this is a great time to be involved with space. It is truly, probably since the Apollo era, the most exciting time with this transition from just pure government to a mix of government and private space activity. And Axiom is very proud to be at the forefront of all of that. Thank you very much.